Dr. Tim McGrew. I'm a Christian philosopher, and I enjoy building connections with people at Atheist Edge.
Josh presented what is known in philosophical circles as the Kalam cosmological argument. All things that begin to exist had a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe had a cause. What could I make of that?
All right, I'm going to refrain from getting into a lengthy discourse here about the Kalam, but I'll just say the premises are flawed. Premise A, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Well, that premise right there, there's no reason to believe that the universe even has a cause. Chris, if I were to ask you, or even a believer, name something that began to exist. You can't say the universe, because we can't go back logically, we can't go back any farther than the singularity, and the singularity is in existence. Well, that's my whole point. There is no before t equals 0. There is no before time. That's an illogical statement. So matter cannot be created or destroyed. As far as we know, there's no human on this earth that has ever seen anything begin to exist. That's why I think it's flawed.
Yeah, I'm going to try and remember what some really smart person on Reddit posted once. But okay, what does it mean for something to truly begin to exist? It's not the same thing as reconfiguring something into something else, which is normally what we see. Well, when I say this chair began to exist, I just mean that I created it out of wood, which was created from other materials and matter, going all the way back to the Big Bang. So when a apologist says when something begins to exist, they're really mean something coming out of nothing at all.
Yeah, they always say that.
So what are they saying came out of nothing at all? Well, the universe.
We can't say that.
Because then the formula becomes, instead of saying everything that began to exist has a cause, you say the universe has a cause.
That's premise 2, right?
Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe had a cause, and it becomes a tautology.
Yeah, you see, the premise 2 is flawed too. Because there's no one alive right now, even Ed Witten at University of Texas, who came up with M theory. No one on this planet knows if the universe began to exist. The farthest back we can go, all our physics, everything breaks down at the singularity. And what is the singularity? It is a thing that exists. So we don't know of anything that began to exist. Was it Carl Sagan said, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, first you must create a universe. If you truly want to make that apple pie from scratch, you would have to create a universe.
He had prayed with me a number of times the previous year when I had badly injured my arm and didn't know if I would ever fence again. And he had given me a blessing on many occasions as I set off on trips to fencing tournaments.
So is the efficacy of a prayer proportional to the amount of people engaging in it? We've talked about this before. If a prayer is spoken by an entire congregation, say 100 times, does that make that prayer more likely to be answered than just one person uttering it? I don't know.
I'm sure these people, everyone in the fencing group was Christians, including Holly eventually, and I'm sure they prayed before every single tournament they went to. And I'm sure there were varying degrees of success, failure. There were varying good or bad attitudes displayed, various good or bad sportsmanship on display. And I don't know how you could determine whether the prayers or the blessings that they were given had any kind of effect on themselves as they went through that process.
I'm going to resist getting into a long tangent about the efficacy of prayer and how it's been tested in the past, but it basically boils down to a coin flip anyway. It would occur exactly as it would randomly.
Confirmation bias.
Yep.
End of story.
Yep. You remember the hits and forget the misses.
We know that most mountain surfaces are formed by erosion, but we are still capable of recognizing Mount Rushmore as a work of human hands.
No. No. I do something.
Oh boy, Mount Rushmore. Okay, here we go again. We are pattern-seeking mammals. We have a genetic tendency to see design in places, even places it doesn't exist. This was, and maybe to some extent, maybe still is, a valuable survival mechanism, but it definitely was in the early days of our species. That's without a doubt. I would ask Dr. Ordway to consider this. Every claim that requires a divine creator has been thoroughly and consistently discredited by thousands of scientific observations and experiments thus far. And on this basis, it's firmly rejected by the scientists.
Yeah, and Mount Rushmore, we can talk to the designers. Well, they're probably dead right now, but we could go and talk to them. We could go watch them design it. We could go see the whole process. And if you want to calling anything about the natural world, calling anything, I'll stick with human beings for simplicity. But if you want to call human beings designed, then you're already presuming design, and you're smuggling in that conclusion. If you want to say that humanity or human bodies fill a certain role and do so pretty well, okay, that's fine. But if you want to bring design into it, then I could point to our inability to make our own vitamin C along with all primates. I could point to a nerve that goes from our brain down into our chest up into our larynx that is also present in giraffes. It takes 14 feet to make a 1 foot journey. You could point to any number. I could talk about our blind spots, which we vertebrates have, but invertebrates like squid and octopus do not have.
All the vestigial aspects of us?
Yeah. Bird wings on flightless birds, blowholes in marine mammals that still have lungs for some reason. Tailbones, funny
eyebrows,
bones. Appendix, yeah. You say...
Babies born with webbed hands and feet.
For sure, we could fill a whole video with these, and you could. I'm sure there's any number of atheist videos you could look at on YouTube about this. But if you say that human beings look designed by a creator for a divine purpose, and I would say, why would I think that all of these, not even like suboptimal designs, but completely counterproductive design decisions, or like why would a perfectly capable, all-powerful designer keep all the same bad genes in us as he did with other primates and other vertebrates? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Josh began to explain a follow-up point. In that case, we can see that the first cause, I interrupted him. It's all right, Josh. You can say God now. He laughed. Okay, then. It was a small step, but one taken nonetheless.
Oh, Holly, I thought you were a fencer, not a long jumper. I mean, holy shit. If you had not blatantly represented atheism earlier, I'd probably be a little easier on you right now. But you know what? Fuck it. This is where your priest or whoever it was should have just said his last rites over your last remaining vestiges of your critical thinking skills, because that was really sad to listen to.
To me, it just sounds like she's trying to be a little funny here, and maybe I just don't find the same things funny. She's trying to lighten up a little bit of a dry section of the book with some humor. And
if it was humor, it went... Maybe I took it too literally.
I realized with a shock that my experiment had started without me, and it had yielded results. Of all the internal experiences I have attempted to describe in this book, this one is probably the most difficult. An atheist might dismiss it as all in my head.
Yeah, for context, this is a result of an experiment where she kind of tries God on for size for a little while, and the criteria for success are basically how she feels afterwards. So she's literally just going by feelings and gut reactions at this point. It's not a scientific experiment by any definition.
Josh was a Christian. His rational faith had led him to believe that a man called Jesus of Nazareth was, in some strange way, the Son of God.
Rational faith. Here we go again with the rational faith. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that idea, that notion. Maybe the believers listening right now can help me out a bit. I'm going to give you 3 words, and you tell me which one is the most synonymous with faith. Here we go. Hoping, knowing, or guessing. All right. Which one is faith closer to? Hoping, knowing, or guessing? Maybe none of these 3 fit, but give me the best one. If none of these 3 fit, give me an alternative synonym. Now, you should have a word in your mind. I'm going to guess that whichever synonym you just chose is causing you a little bit of cognitive dissonance.
So it doesn't really go into a lot of arguments for miracles. I genuinely don't know of any good arguments for miracles that aren't just God could do that. So, but she's being presented as this, as a very neophyte believer, and she just, once again, it's the power of God as an explanation for literally everything and anything, that it's almost useless. I'd be curious to see how, if you're presented with a scenario and you don't know how it happened, at what point you start bringing in God as an explanation before you've ruled out all natural explanations, even ones you might not be aware of. Because that's the entire history of science right there. We have unknown causes for things. People call that God, and then we find out it's some natural thing.
And if it didn't happen all the time, I mean, just the fact that it happens all the time throughout history. Oh, what does Tim Minchin say? You know Tim Minchin, the comedian?
Yep.
He said, like, throughout history, what is it? Every mystery that's ever been solved has turned out to be what? Not magic.
Yeah, it's like going to a magic show and you don't know exactly how the magician does the trick. Do you assume that, it's an illusion and there's some natural explanation for it that you don't happen to be aware of right now? Or are you like, it's real, actual magic, guys?
There are theological magic shows where people do think they're real, but it's the same sort of trickery. It's called faith healing, Benny Hinn, and all. It's the same thing, except they don't tell you up front that it's fake.
As I read, I found that the arguments for the possibility of miracles were more convincing than the arguments against miracles.
See, I just don't know when there would be a good reason to jump to a supernatural explanation. It's like before we knew about germ theory, if someone were to put out there, disease was caused by evil spirits, is that a acceptable explanation in lieu of anything else? Well, no, you need to actually be able to, the explanation itself still needs to be supported on its own, whether or not you want to. It can't just be accepted as the default because you don't know any better.
And it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to just hang with that for a while.
That's how you learn things.
Yes.
You say, I don't know, but let's go find out. And then you know.
This is how we would think about it, Josh said. First, we would consider whether we had a good naturalistic explanation for something. Not just a possible one, but one that rationally makes sense. If not, we would consider whether there was a good reason to consider a supernatural explanation.
Science they're always looking, even if hypothetically we exhausted all our our attempts for a natural explanation. We don't end with, it must be the sky wizard. What? Keep looking.
Yeah, and there's going to be situations, especially about stuff that happened in the past, that we don't have the ability to perform experiments on them because they're one-time historical occurrences, and because not everything in history has robust documentation, we just are not going to have all the information ever about Jesus miracles or any other religious.
You're talking historical accuracy. That's different from a hard science. His history is all varying levels of probability. Even the Emancipation Proclamation You and I could sit here and say we couldn't do any better than 99.9% sure that that was actually written and spoken by Abraham Lincoln. But we could never say, because that's all history is. It's varying levels of probability.
Yeah, and if you want to bring in God as a potential explanation for historical events, if you just take it for granted that God is potentially there, then the probability of God acting in some unknown scenario is 100% every time. You can't never rule that out. Whereas if God does not factually exist, the probability is 0% every time.
The Gospels were full of miracles. Had Jesus really walked on water? Had he fed 5,000 people from just a couple of loaves of bread? When the sick came to him, did he really cure them with a word or a touch?
Why do we not see miracles of this nature anymore? It all happened way back then. So the miracles were so blatant and in your face. And then over time, miracles now are internal diseases, stuff that you can't see, like cancer. You don't see limbs growing back, like the big in-your-face miracles. You just don't see those anymore. It's so common. It was so commonplace back then. And if God really was omnibenevolent, if Jesus was omnibenevolent, he wouldn't just heal 2 people from blindness and maybe, I don't know, 1 from leprosy, and he cast some demons out of one guy and he raised the guy back from the dead. It was just hit or miss, onesies and twosies. If he was omnibenevolent, why wasn't he just exhausting his entire waking day just constantly healing people?
I think the apologetics, and okay, I have my asshole atheist hat over here. I'm going to put on my Christian apologetics hat, which I brought with me. I brought a whole hat rack with me. But I think the apologetic answer would be that miracles were not commonplace occurrences. Most days back in Judea were pretty mundane, and every now and again Jesus comes in and heals someone, and we just happen to have a book that records those healings.
Oh, so he did it. He was more prolific than the book only just talks about a few of them.
Yeah, and even John says there's so much other stuff that Jesus did that it would take volumes to record them all. Now, I think the bigger question is, the Bible isn't the only holy book that records miracles. You have them all across the various religious beliefs over time, and I don't know if we're supposed to take them at face value, just because they are also supernatural and unfalsifiable for the same reasons that Jesus' miracles are.
The apostles preached the crucified and risen Christ at a time when most of the eyewitnesses were still alive.
See, this is the argument that I've never ever understood, because we have, like, for instance, we have Paul writing to Corinthians, and he talks about he appeared to the 12 and then he appeared to the 500, and Christians will take that as, hey, you have all these people that you could talk to if you wanted to confirm what Jesus did. But it's being written to Corinth, which is like 700 miles away, and this is before internet, before air travel. You can't just like schlep on down to Judea anytime you want to and look at the readily available phone book of people who have witnessed Jesus' miracles to go ahead and confirm it. The vast majority of people, outside of some maybe wealthy travelers who could up and leave whenever they wanted, most people just had to take Paul's word for it.
Yeah, and Paul never even met Jesus, of course, we said that. Never met him face to face. And this was 30 years plus after Jesus' death. And from the time of Jesus' death till Paul, nothing got written down. The epistles are the first word we get of Jesus. Why so many decades? It seems like, I mean, what all happened at the crucifixion? An earthquake, dead saints climbing out of graves and walking around Jerusalem, the tearing of the shroud, an eclipse, I think. I mean, a lot of really blatant things happened, and nothing got written down by even non-Jews, maybe Roman historians. Nothing.
You have people writing about life in Judea at that time, and none of them thinks to mention the really weird instance of the time the zombies roamed through Jerusalem for a couple hours. Or you don't have astronomers reporting an eclipse at that time, and astronomy was actually a robust science back then. And it wouldn't have just been visible in Judea, it would have been visible all over the place. So even in Persia or Greece or Alexandria or China. Or these other places where people were observing the skies, we have no indication of that. And we can also go back and calculate, because of regular rotations we can go back and calculate, and you can even calculate there would have been an eclipse at that time
if we knew the exact year that he died.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because there's a 10-year kind of void there between Quirinius as governor, and I'm not going to get off on that tangent, but Herod's death was what, 4 BCE, and Quirinius supposedly didn't become governor until 6 CE, so there's a 10-year gap there that we just don't know.
They offer him a piece of fish, and he eats it. And they have another confirmation that this truly is the resurrected Lord.
Look, I know you've heard this before, most of you, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Believe it or not, we atheists just don't turn our back to God because we want to sin or we have hardened hearts. It's simply that we just don't think the stories are true. It's just that simple.
You know, I saw the risen Elvis the other day, and I know it was him because he ate a peanut butter and banana sandwich. Do you believe me, just because I said it?
It needs more extraordinary evidence.
Possibly.
Because that is a very extraordinary claim.
And then, when Jesus appeared to his terrified, cowardly disciples, he did so not as a spirit, not as a memory, but in his body. Here was the same Jesus who had been laid in the tomb.
Well, of course, this is taking for granted that the gospel accounts are true and accurate to history. You can find any number of alternate ideas for the growth of the church, the belief of the disciples, that don't involve actually witnessing a bodily resurrected Jesus. This is one of those minimal facts things that I don't think necessarily holds water. I mean, we just read a book by Bart Ehrman where he brings in the very real phenomenon of grief hallucinations, where people think they see...
grief hallucination, yeah.
I'm not sure that's a scientific term for it, but the idea that people see the recently deceased, they have visions of them, and I don't think it necessarily had to happen to all 12 disciples all at the same time in order for it to gain traction. You could just have various reports from that time, which they could very well have happened to more than one of the disciples. And by the time the Gospels are written, that story had evolved into all the disciples. And Jesus ate fish, and you could touch his holes. Giggity. But
I would like... She makes a lot of claims right here. She packs a lot of claims into 2 sentences. I would say I would like to see that in a Wikipedia entry, because I know at the end of it will say citation needed. And don't say the Gospels, because the Gospels were written well after the events described, and they weren't even written by the authors they are now attributed to. This is common knowledge. You can argue it all you want. This is the consensus. Mark didn't write Mark. Luke didn't write Luke, for instance. The titles don't say according to Matthew, the original titles. If you look at the original book of Matthew, it doesn't have the gospel according to Matthew. It was not, these titles were added around the middle of the 2nd century. And don't say any extra biblical scholars, just like Chris just said. I'll quote Bart Ehrman. In the entire 1st century, Jesus is not mentioned by a single Greek or Roman historian, religion scholar, politician, philosopher, or poet. His name never occurs in a single inscription, and it is never found in a single piece of private correspondence.
Atheist Edge. Walking the edge of what some consider offensive. But your feelings don't matter here, only facts. Edgy commentary on the dangers of doctrine, the foibles of faith, the bullshit of belief, the stupidity of superstition, and the idiocy of indoctrination. With razor-sharp wit, curiosity, and critical thought, we take an unblinking look at today's religions. We are atheist edge.